In this video, I'm going to show you how to factor special kinds of polynomials, and specifically in this video, I'm going to focus on 6 examples for what is called the difference of two perfect squares. And so your textbook, what you'll see is something like this for kind of what it looks like generically. It would be a square term minus a square term. And so this is what they call a difference of squares, and how you factor it is like this. It says, when a binomial has a leading coefficient that is a perfect square and a constant that is a perfect square, and the operation is subtraction in the middle, then the binomial is called the difference of the two perfect squares. And so what we're going to do is take the square root of a squared, which is a, and the square root of b, and each factor gets an a and a b. And so what happens is a times a gets you a squared, and the b times b will get you the b squared. And so that there's no middle term, one of your factor pairs will have a plus and the other factor pair will have a minus. And so if you see me write down on any of my notes, difference of two perfect squares, actually I wrote that wrong, difference of two perfect squares, that's what it would be if I could write it out right. Difference of two perfect squares, that's what that stands for. And so I'm going to give you 6 examples on how to factor. It's actually very quick. It would be, as you're looking at your 4x squared, what are the square roots here? Or 2x times 2x. And then the square roots of 9, which would be 3 and 3. And so your factor pairs each get a 2x and a 3. And one gets a plus and one gets a minus. And that way, when you multiply them together, you'll have your 4x squared in the front and your 9 in the end, and your middle terms will cancel out because of the plus and minus. And I'll show you a check on this one so how you know. Again, your 25x squared is a 5x times a 5x, and the 49 is a 7 times a 7. So one factor gets a 5x with a 7. The other gets a 5x with a 7, and you just need one of your binomials to have a plus and one to have a minus. Okay, now I want to show you how to check your work to make sure that this works out correctly. So here's my check. 5x times 5x is 25x squared. 5x times 7 is a 35x. Negative 7 times 5x is minus 35x. So notice these two terms are going to cancel out because one is a positive, one is a negative. And negative 7 times 7 is negative 49. And so I have my 25x squared and minus 49. So I checked it to make sure it works out. All right, so here's another one here. 100x squared is a 10x times a 10x. And 1 is 1 times 1. And so our factors will be a 10x with a 1, another 10x with a 1. One gets a plus sign, one gets a minus sign. It's pretty simple. All right, now 4x squared plus 16. If you can, you should always look for a GCF of your terms. I notice how both of these are divisible by 4. And so now I have an x times an x, a 2 times a 2. So with the 4 out front, then I'll have an x with a 2, another x with a 2. One gets a plus, one gets a minus. So that one maybe was slightly harder because we had a GCF of both our terms. All right, now x times x makes x squared. 1 times 1 makes 1. So one factor gets a positive 1, and one factor gets a negative 1. Now 8 and 50 both have something in common. Here the GCF is a 2. So kind of like how we pulled out a GCF here. Then we'll have a 4x squared and a 25. Each of these have a perfect square, 2x times 2x, and a 5 times a 5. So the 2 that we pulled out, the GCF in the front, is going to stay out front. Now we'll have a 2x and a 5 for my factor, a 2x and a 5 for my other factor, and one of them will have a plus sign, and one of them will have a minus sign. And that is how you factor a difference of two perfect squares.